Okay, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and good night to everybody. This is the first episode of Perspectives. I'm Pablo Apiolazza, I'm your host, and I'm thrilled to be with my guest, Giles, right?
Giles.
Giles Crouch. Well, this podcast is inspired on the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, for those who don't know. So it's not by chance that we start today with this subject and this topic, because it's the week to talk about these subjects. So I thought it would be amazing to have a conversation with Giles about this, because he's quite into the subject. I will introduce him. Giles Crouch is the Chief Innovation Officer of NordSpark, an innovation agency based in Nova Scotia, Canada. He has over 20 years of experience bringing technology products to global markets. And he combines marketing, cultural anthropology, and the innovation framework to navigate this new landscape that is the digital world. So I would like for him to tell me a little bit more about what he does on a daily basis. So we kick off with the questions.
Hey, thanks very much, Pablo. Lovely to be here. So my daily is working with technology companies to bring their products to market, or oftentimes just developing products from a human-centric approach. So doing UX research, UX strategy, but also deploying innovation frameworks to help them bring those innovations to the marketplace. And sometimes that's working with nonprofit organizations and large global organizations too. So my day-to-day is really helping organizations figure out how technology can fit in with to their audience, to their market, whether that's on the commercial side or on the nonprofit side.
Tell me about your title, which is like a digital anthropologist. What is it?
Yeah, that's a good question. We always think of anthropology as, oh, that's old humans and bones and stuff, and looking back thousands of millions of years. And that's not anthropology. That is part of anthropology. That's paleoanthropology. But anthropology is really looking at what it means to be a human being. How do we live in our world as humans and behavior? And so my studies were in the area of cultural anthropology. And what I do is translate that to the digital world. How are we using digital technologies? What does it mean for humans and humanity as a result of these technologies? So there are other digital anthropologists. The anthropology field is, evolving. We have economic anthropologists, we have social anthropologists, so and cultural and digital and technology anthropologists. So there's a number of anthropology roles and titles, if you will, that are evolving.
Yeah. It is. There was a time like 10 years ago or something where it was hard to find a work as anthropologists, right? At least that was the commonplace myth in the universities, like, oh, you're studying anthropology, where are you going to work? But now actually it's one of the booming professions in the digital world, isn't it?
It absolutely is. Anthropology, because it's a study of humans, and now we're looking at all these technologies that have come into the world, and we're really starting to say, okay, how are these really benefiting us beyond just the consumer aspect of where do we buy on Amazon, and subscribing to email apps and programs, and we're starting to say, okay, yeah, but what does all this mean? Like, how does this put it into context? And these technologies are impacting absolutely every aspect of our world today. We're hyper connected. We live in what I call a phygital world. So the physical and the digital at the same time. And we've never done this as humans before. We're in a way, we're already cyborgs. We type something into Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, or a social media app, and we walk away, and then an entire conversation will happen around something that we said, that we aren't even present for until we come back to it later. So this is not a world that our brains have been designed to deal with. We're dealing with two realities, the physical reality and the digital reality. So that's why anthropology is becoming such a hot topic, because we're trying to figure out how do we live in this world.
This is fascinating because I would love to get into this, but I don't want to segue too much about the topic. Maybe in another episode, but yeah, sure. It's maybe we touched it a little bit ahead, but I wanted to get into the topic of today, right? About the innovation and global goals, right? Because the SDGs, as people might know, are some kind of, how do we put it? Like a pledge to reach very important objectives that mankind has or should have in order to, survive as a species, probably, and also to do it without damaging the ecology, the society, and so forth. So, what do you think? How does innovation play a role in achieving these global goals like the SDGs?
Well, yeah, it's such a good question. I think the first part is understanding what innovation is and what it means. It's tossed around a lot without a lot of defined meaning. Like we talk about digital transformation, transforming what, and what does digital mean? So innovation is the same thing. And, large institutions and organizations say, oh, we're going to innovate. But institution and innovation are, they're opposite terms. Institutions are not really designed for innovation. And innovation means doing things differently. It means thinking in different contexts. It's experimenting. It's getting things out into the marketplace. So in the terms of sustainable goals, I think that it means institutions have to sort of break out different innovation units and departments and start to think in ways that they're not used to thinking, because large organizations, institutions, they've had these processes and frameworks that are very bureaucratic, necessarily so, and there's nothing wrong with that. But those sort of inhibit innovation. So what we've got to do now is think in terms of socio-cultural systems, in terms of systems thinking, because our world is made up of systems, and institutions don't normally think about that. So what it means is that they need to innovate in how they deliver solutions to developing nations and even developed nations, and how all these systems have to work together and play with each other. So you need to think of innovation from that side, but also how do you bring ideas into the marketplace? An idea is not an innovation until it active in the marketplace. In the business sense, it's generating revenue. In the nonprofit or IGO sense, in that it's delivering a social good.
It's interesting because there's a lot of public commentary around this kind of new paradigm of decentralization of everything, pretty much, like services, policies, politics, even or economics, and how difficult it is for policymakers, governments to keep up with this new model, because governments are usually centralized to control and enforce policies. But how do you see this clash between digital innovation and policy making?
Yeah, that's a good question. It is a clash. These are systemic changes. When you talk about decentralization, part of that is what they call Web3, which really is sort of it's a neat idea, but there's nothing really out there that makes any sense at scale yet. That doesn't mean it won't happen. There's blockchain. These are things that large institutions, governments really struggle with, because they're built on hierarchical systems. And they've evolved these systems over many hundreds of years and ways of working, and so they're not used to thinking out of the box. They like the outcomes. When they do development projects today, it's like, we think this is what needs to happen. They work with the government of another country. So two governments work together because one says, well, we need a new hospital or we need a new airport, and they're like, okay, well, let's do that project. but they don't think about how those technologies might actually impact a culture. And each culture sees technologies very differently. So this is a big challenge. It's going to be really messy for probably the next 15, 20 years. As these institutions, as financial models change, as capitalism changes, economic models. So this is going to create a lot of tension over the next 15 to 20 years. Eventually we'll figure it out. We always do, but it's going to be messy. Yeah.
Do you recognize other challenges? What do you think are the main challenges in the future to reach the SDGs in these terms?
Yeah, I think the two big things are innovation models and frameworks and how those are applied. But over top of all of that is systems thinking, sociocultural systems, to really see that, as we are so connected with each other, the impacts of technology on different cultures and how they change cultures. So we haven't really looked at a lot of these from a cultural lens. We've looked at it from an economic development lens, or just a business and an industry lens, or an engineering. And we've spent so much time solving for problems. This is something that's come out of Silicon Valley with technology, is we're going to solve a problem. So that's the way a lot of governments have looked at things. We're going to solve a problem. You need water, you need irrigation for your agricultural system, you need power. Well, they've looked at it, let's solve that problem, but they're not looking at it in a systemic way. They're looking at it just solving an engineering problem, but then they don't realize that, well, that has implications to political systems, to power systems, to the economics of a nation, how the social structure goes. Because once you make those big changes with a sustainable development goal, you're impacting every part of society. So that means the application of systems thinking. So it's sociocultural systems, economic systems, and global systems, how the earth works as a system, because we know the earth is a bunch of systems.
You told me something about bringing these kind of solutions to global markets, right? Can you give me one of the examples of the work that you're currently doing, and how in order for the audience to understand the scale and the complexity of the issues?
Sure. So one would be working with a company that's been developing a device that drops into a toilet, and it can test for pregnancy. It would test for maybe kidney disease, your blood sugar levels. And the idea was, this could be so good around the world, even in developing nations. This would be so easy to implement. Well, the first major impact is the way that we use bathrooms and washrooms. They are a very private activity. We like to close the doors when we're in a bathroom and a washroom, and this pretty much goes across every single culture. So as we look at deploying this technology, yeah, it could help, but at the same time, we have to deal with culture. If culture doesn't accept the technology, it's not going to work. We look at the way they wanted to change irrigation systems in some of these Asian countries and make them bigger and better. And they came in with engineering projects and said, we're going to run these artesian wells, and we're going to build this big cisterns, and we're going to, put sprinkling systems in. And they didn't realize, I think this was in Thailand, that the way that the rice farmers work, it's not just the growth of rice, but it's the role that rice plays in overall society. So rice is more than just a food, it's and a staple. It actually has spiritual connection and meaning, and the rice paddies and the way that they organize in those cultures is very much the fabric of life. So if all of a sudden you're saying, okay, change all this, now you're going to have massive fields, and we're going to put all kinds of pipes in, and we're going to put all kinds of water filtration and technologies in, it was completely rejected by those cultures. They're like, no, you can't do that, because in the middle of many of these rice paddies would be small temples. So the temples served both a spiritual role to these communities, but they also served a role of collection of water and distribution of water. So they solved the technology problem, and they solved a religious issue as well. So, that was a great idea with all kinds of technology, but it just wouldn't fly.
So what do you think? How can digital technologies actually facilitate this global sociocultural change that aligns with these global goals? How can you, well, how can we align with agency these very different perspectives of the same issue?
Yeah. So some technology are global in their reach. You think of the mobile phone. The way that we use a smartphone in the developed world is very different from the way a smartphone is used in other countries. So I was in Kenya a number of years ago, and they had just figured out how to create a using Twitter, a text system through a mobile phone. It wasn't a smartphone, but it was being used, and there was a woman in this village, and she'd lost her cow. She couldn't find her cow. And that cow is incredibly important. It's a source of nutrition. It's an economic value. It's an economic unit. So by having this smartphone, what she could do was send out some tweets over the network. And someone in another village said, yeah, I found your cow. It wandered over here. And so there's a great example of a smartphone or a mobile phone has different contexts in different cultures. And it also, so it's seeing technology really from that cultural perspective, what the role that culture plays in how it will accept and adopt and use a technology. When we think of it in global and SDG goals, we have to think too in the type of culture that's using a technology. There are type 1 cultures and type 2. So type 1 culture is very me. And probably the ultimate of that is the United States. So Americans look at a new device coming in. Well, how's that going to help me? How does that, build my social network? How does that make me more money? How does it, can I be an influencer? What can I do with this for me? Versus a we culture, which we see in Europe, Nordic nations, Asia. They look at a technology and they say, okay, how does this impact my family? How does it impact my community, my region, my nation? And then lastly, how does it impact me? So, we see the different uses of technologies in Europe and Asia versus how they're used in the United States or Canada, sort of a weird mix of American and Nordic cultures, a little bit more socialist, but yeah.
This is a very interesting segue because right now, what mainly is happening is that, of course, it's impossible not to talk about artificial intelligence in the terms that exist right now, the artificial narrow intelligence, which is, for those who don't know, an artificial intelligence without agency. So right now we're seeing this huge leap into productivity and other improvements of the daily life without a lot of without too much in terms of what a theoretical artificial intelligence can achieve. And this artificial intelligence is being developed in mostly in the United States, like that is, as you said, more a me culture in terms of alignment of and priorities. But it's being deployed universally in all types of cultures. What do you think will be the role of this of this relationship and how it will develop in the future?
Yeah, it's so key. AI is going to have such an incredible impact on our world, and like any technologies are neutral, sort of. It depends on the intent in which they were invented. Artificial intelligence, like any other tool, is a double-edged sword. It can be used for good and bad, and all technologies have unintended consequences. When social media hit the world, we thought, this is great, democracy everywhere, and the fall of autocracy, and it would be amazing. And pretty much the exact opposite happened. So an increase in autocracies, we're seeing huge political divides, economic divides. So, those are the unintended consequences. I don't think Mark Zuckerberg, when he was sitting there designing Facebook, ever dreamt that he'd actually be hiring a former, major British politician who was a deputy prime minister to come in and run his global affairs department. I don't think he ever thought he'd have that. So we cannot really know exactly how AI is going to change the world. We have some ideas. One of the powers of AI is that it can tell stories. And stories is how we as a society have evolved. We created language, and through language we tell stories. Stories is how we share our realities with each other. So if AI, and this is, out of Yuval Harari, who said, AI can tell stories, this can change the world, and for the bad and for the good. But let's bring it back to sustainable goals here, and sustainability and the role of AI. Where I see AI is very much going back to the time of the Mayans and Mayan civilization. So the Mayans were brilliant engineers. They were incredible designers. They built these sophisticated cities. They built incredible irrigation systems. And they were doing this at a time of significant drought. And we're not talking a couple of years of drought. We're talking decades of drought. And they were building irrigation systems to keep the crops watered, to grow the crops. But they only got so far. Their cognitive capacity to engineer their environment, to find the water and bring it in and keep their cities livable and sustainable, just basically collapsed. So as a society, they resorted to things like human sacrifice and to other rituals. They went down the road of religion and spirituality, which are in some senses fantasies and stories that we tell to make sense of our world. So the Mayans only got so far with their technology. Well, we're at the exact same point again today with climate change. There's only so much that, even though we have many brilliant people in the world, there's only so far that our cognitive capabilities can go. So I see the role of artificial intelligence as augmenting us. And I think it's going to play a vital role in how we fight climate change, how we figure out these complex systems and issues that I've been talking about, sociocultural systems and systems thinking. AI could play a vital role in augmenting us in that way.
It's very interesting because you pointed out the moment in history where pretty much we could say that the science, because it was the science, it was of course previous of the definition of science, but of course there was a lot of theoretical base and technology, applied technology pretty much into the Mayan culture, and there was this big contrast with religion that in some terms was completely misaligned from rational thinking. Yeah. And do you think that this is repeating as well and in our days with anti-intellectualism and also the side effects of social media, like fake news, misinformation, and disinformation?
Yeah, absolutely. So the saying is history doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. And the other one is history is a remix. So we're in very similar situations today in economic disparity and wealth disparity. We're back to the age of the robber barons, where there's accumulated wealth in the elite of society, and everybody else is we see wage suppression, we see the economic gaps growing, people are frustrated. Part of the big issue that's happening now, where we see so much division and misinformation and all that this is going on, is because of the internet. We used to have a lot of space between cultures. So we had space and time. You'd have two dominant cultures, one in the north and one in the south. And then sort of in the middle were these smaller societies and communities and groups. And technologies would pass between these cultures, but they would sort of get filtered in the middle. So by the time they reached each other's, people had changed the technology, adapted it to their culture. But so we had time and we had space. So we could, figure out whether we really liked each other or not. And if we didn't like each other, maybe we'd go thump each other on the head, or maybe we'd say, hey, we really love each other, so let's, form a bigger society. But we had time and space. We don't have that time and space anymore. Now, all of a sudden, every culture in the world is coming into contact with everyone else. Even, the Tatars in Mongolia and the Kyrgyz, like, they have smartphones. They're connected to the internet. They're seeing the global conversation. I mean, these are traditional, hunter-gatherer, herding societies, nomadic societies that now have access to these technologies. So we don't have the time and space to figure out technologies, how we want to use them, how we want to adapt them, and when we want to change them. We don't have that time anymore. So that's why we have so much division today. So we used to have all that time, now we don't. So it's causing all these clashes of cultures, if you will.
This is fascinating because, what you're saying pretty much is that we are getting all this turmoil because these people were never actually in contact pretty much before.
Yeah, yeah.
So now it's time to solve our issues pretty much.
It is. So we need new frameworks, new models. This is where innovation frameworks can play a key role. And you think of sustainable development goals. Well, now all these cultures are clashing, and there used to be very much a system in place. America or whatever country went into a developing nation and said, we're going to fix all these problems for you, and they did, and then they leave, and often it would turn out to be a complete mess because they did leave. But now it's these other countries, you're seeing values alignment, right? You've got autocracies like China that are coming in and saying, we'll build your railroad, we'll help you build a better electrical grid and put in all the rest of it. And guess what? We're not going to ask you to change your human rights. We're not going to ask you to be nicer to your citizens. But we're also going to hold you economic hostage too, because we also know you're probably not going to improve because we're not going to help you in that regard. We're just going to leave you to your own devices. Oh, and when everything starts to collapse and you can't pay the bill anymore, we're going to come in and take over that railway, that energy system, whatever it is, as China, and we'll run it. The other downside too, when an autocracy like China comes in, is that rather than building skills and capacity in the country where they're doing the work, they import Chinese workers. So you're not developing skills and capacity in that country. One of the more interesting frameworks that's come into play in recent years through the UN and other organizations is that now, rather than going into the country and doing a project, they're going in and building capacity within that country. Rwanda is a great example. So they built the capacity, they trained people in Rwanda in economic development and business models and whatever, and construction and all that kind of stuff. So, these countries that get that capacity building training, they're far more successful in the longer term. So they can contribute in a more meaningful way to the sustainable development goals that we have in place. So that's part of the change of those economic models. But we've got this change in value systems underway in the world. We've got autocracies with Russia and China and Iran, that they think citizens are dumb and shouldn't have a voice. And then we've got the democracies and varying formats that are saying, yeah, citizens have a right, they have a voice. Democracies may be messy, but they're far better than a dictatorship.
In these terms, it's very interesting, the recent article that is, by the way I discovered you pretty much by chance reading on Medium about the new relationship in terms of economics and politics and development, right? Can you make some commentary around it?
Yeah, that's good. Thanks. Homo economicus versus Homo culturalis. This is the I think it's the end state of capitalism 1.0 that we've been in for a few hundred years. And originally when capitalism came along, really invented by the Roman Empire, and the Romans said, hey, we have this huge empire, we have to get things out there. We as a government can't do that. So they went to the merchant class and they said, hey, if you send goods to far reaches of the empire by ship or horse or wagon or whatever, you can make money off of that. And they said, yeah. So but the idea was delivering a social good, and we even saw this even up to now, where Peter Drucker, the management guru, said, yeah, the purpose of a business is to deliver a social good. That's not happening anymore, right? Now what's happened is, rather than the customer being the consumer today has become the shareholder. So the consumer is just a means towards a dividend. It's the downside of capitalism, where it's focused on dividends and profit making versus delivering a social good. So that's Homo economicus. It's the attempt through business to quantify absolutely everything we do as a human being, with the whole end result of you just need to buy. But that's not human nature. It never has been. This system is really kind of antithetical to how we run our world. We had feudalism. We've had all kinds of economic systems throughout history for thousands of years. Some of them were based on trading seashells, others based on shark teeth and bear stuff. There was always different measures of economic value. Even today, we see this in the Tatan societies and the Kyrgyz society. They don't think about money ever. Everything is based on the value of the number of sheep or goat that you have, or a yak, right? That's money to them, right? So that's homo culturalis in our economic systems, or what we call in anthropology is systems of reciprocity. And there's all kinds of them around the world, as our crypto is a system of reciprocity. So capitalism has gone down this path of it's all for the shareholder and they want their dividends, which creates nowism, right? It's short-term thinking. That actually hurts the business. There's a reason that many businesses are failing today, or there's so much merger and acquisition and they don't survive very long, is because it's such short-term thinking. They're not allowed to plan 10, 20, 50 years down the road like they used to do, because shareholders want their dividend this quarter. Where are the sales this quarter? I want my dividend check. All right. And, everything else, forget it. So the quality of products is declining. We've got more and more. We have a massive amount of technology products and far more than we can actually comprehend on a daily basis. So I think where we are is we're starting in this phase of changing from capitalism 1.0 to capitalism 2.0. If I could tell you exactly what that looks like, I'd be filthy rich.
Exactly. It's interesting because you mentioned something quite interesting also, that I also think it might be the case of a very vast school of thought of the management system, because it looks like the incentives of individuals in the management role of companies are always to actually show shareholders a spike, a point up, some increase in order to look good, but in the short term. But that actually that can actually be very artificial, because they can, for example, cut costs that are very important for the long-term survivability of a company or something. So do you think actually also with this massive spike that we will see in productivity, and also the shifting of lots of roles in jobs, and substitution of jobs and changing of roles, that we might see also a shift in these relationships? Because if nobody has nothing to do, nobody can buy anything, pretty much, right?
Yeah, that's a weird thing. There's a lot of people saying, "Oh, there's going to be no jobs left," and this has happened several times as we've seen revolutionary technologies come into the world. It's the same thing with the railroad, with the printing press, the loom, right? Everybody's the Luddites, and we talk about Luddites. Well, Luddites, they didn't hate the technology; they just wanted fair compensation, right? And so that's why they went around smashing machines, is because you're just not paying me well.
That's something that not many people say about Luddites, actually. It's
they think, oh, they just hated technology. No, not at all. They had no problem with the technology. It was just getting a fair wage. Well, don't we hear that a lot today? People are saying, well, we see wage suppression. Now we've seen a trend in Silicon Valley, less of laying people off, but actually paying them less. They were getting a good coin. Now they're not. We saw the IT worker in the late 90s that was, in early 2000s. System administrators are pretty much gone. IT support workers have had their wages decreasing for many years. Productivity is actually plateaued. We haven't seen an uptick in productivity since IT came into the world. And we thought, okay, information technology, computers, now we're going to have this huge improvement in productivity, but we're not. We actually have a slump in productivity. Can AI make up for that? Maybe. I think it could. It could take away the drudgery, the mundane work that is because narrow AI is very good at doing one thing. So it could be very good at helping in, I think, initially in marketing. Could be the insurance industry, for example, for checking off forms. So whatever we can automate in a very simple, narrow way, it will. This will free us up to do more interesting work. So now I think you're going to see so many more innovations happen, much more than what we've ever seen before. So I think we'll actually end up with a lot more jobs, and we're going to end up with more wealth as we change our financial systems. But all of this, management systems have to change. The way companies operate have to change. Bureaucratic systems have to change. We're in the early phases of that. It's going to be very messy for the next 10, 15, 20 years. And then we're going to have a golden age. And it's going to be like probably a golden age of wealth like we've never seen before.
So do you think that we will actually achieve the SDGs by 2030 or not?
No, not at all.
No.
If we had stable political systems, if we had, global trade was working okay, and we didn't have all this kerfuffle that we have today, and we weren't going through this revolutionary period, we probably could. But they're nice ideals. We need to have them. We need to have these goals. We need to have this dialogue. It's absolutely critical. We shouldn't stop working on them. Will we reach them by 2030? Probably not. We're more likely to be in a greater state of conflict and wars, whether they're economic trade wars or they're actual, kinetic wars. But it's going to be too messy for the next while to get to those goals.
It's very interesting what you pointed out about this knowledge gap, pretty much, because as you said, you will see incredible innovations in pretty much every aspect of human life. But in order to achieve that, it looks like there's a change of in the evolution of language. You also talk about this in your Medium channel. Do you think that there's a shift? Because we've seen how coding language has been some sort of new literacy, and so people who actually can code are literate in the sense of the potential that they can reach with their skills. It's like coding right now looks like the difference between reading and not reading. Do you agree with this, or do you think that now AI will actually shorten the gap of this massive difference?
Yeah, boy, because language is so complicated. There's about 7,000 languages spoken in the world today. About 2,000 are in danger of falling. And I think the nature of the globalization of technologies and the way we can communicate, real-time translation is going to happen. So we won't necessarily have to learn another language. I think there's a sadness in that. I'm learning Welsh because that's my background, and I want to learn to. It is a very complicated language. But languages are going to die. We'll probably end up with some kind of global language. They tried this a long time ago called Esperanto, and I think it was the 50s. And there's still some people that speak it. Language, is going to be different too, because we're going to see symbolism come back into play. Emojis are essentially hieroglyphics. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. So, hieroglyphs in Egypt, and now we have emojis. So we have
memes right now, right?
We have memes, right? Memes are they can be good, but they're actually very dangerous for society because they take complex issues and they simplify them. And they dumb them down. And that is a knowledge gap right there as to what you're talking about. Because if we think in terms of memes and we share things in memes to tell stories, that's actually very dangerous, because it takes away critical thinking. It takes everything down to a simple problem. In order to evolve our societies and our language and how we apply language to building our societies, we need to have more critical thinking. And so that's why I don't like memes, because I see them as being too dangerous to society because they take away critical thinking. That's
quite interesting, because I never thought about I never thought it in those terms. But yeah, it is also one of the main issues in with the science communication, which is something that we deal with on a daily basis, because this knowledge gap must be it must work as a ladder, because you cannot explain everything all at once. You have to create some steps in order for people to, get on board on some concept and go from complete ignorance into, a complete understanding of a concept. And that takes a lot of time and a lot of different levels of synthesis and simplification. But as you said, sometimes making things too simple are not explaining anything at all, actually, and doing more damage than good. So
yeah, memes don't tell a story, and I think scientists, they can tell stories, and the better scientists get at storytelling, that's why we see Neil deGrasse Tyson, for example. He's a good storyteller. Carl Sagan was a storyteller. The better a scientists can be at telling stories, part of what I see coming out of some scientists today is that it's sort of, they get angry that people don't understand what they're talking about, and so they kind of can get up on a bit of a high horse, or they kind of talk down to people, and that's not how you communicate a message. But you understand that very well in your world. So the better scientists can be, and organizations that are scientifically driven, telling stories, people get it. That's what they love. It's telling a story that informs them and changes their reality. Stories are how we share our reality with one another, because your reality is very different from my reality and everybody else's reality, right? So the only way we can find common ground is language and telling stories. And now we have these wonderful technologies where we can tell stories on our smartphones. It's right, and stories are instantly there. Memes can be funny. They're not all bad, but in the political term and telling scientific things, I don't think memes work well. But short stories can, and be very powerful. Yeah.
Okay, I think we are wrapping up. I mean, I can keep going if you want. But of course, you might be busy. But I would like to wrap up a little bit of the concepts that we were talking today, and actually try to leave something. Of course, we were kind of bleak in terms of the reaching of the SDGs, but it's like a bittersweet situation here, right? Because we're saying that actually there will be chances to shorten the distance. Maybe we will not reach them altogether, and there's some tough moments ahead. But in your personal experience, and also from the anthropological point of view, what do you think are the good insights or good advice for institutions, for companies, and for regular people like our audience to do their best to reach them?
Yeah, so for institutions, I'd say really understand what innovation is. Get comfortable with taking risks through experimentation. Large bureaucracies, organizations, institutions, they're afraid of risk, but the way to mitigate that is to do all kinds of small experiments. That's what you do if you're starting a software company. You go out, you do a little experiment, you create a hypothesis, and you send it out to some people like a prototype and say, hey, what do you think of this? And you get feedback, and you iterate, and you develop, and you go from there. And eventually you have an innovation that works. Well, the same thing can be done by these institutions. They can think in innovation terms and say, let's create all kinds of little experiments. Normally they just go build the project, implement it, and then they hire someone to do monitoring and evaluation after the implementation. That's okay, but that obviously hasn't worked. And I see a lot of them say, we want to take new approaches, but then they never do, because that means risk. They're not rewarded by taking risks, but you can mitigate risks. I think the same thing applies to citizen groups and organizations. There's been an expectation by many of us in society that government has to solve problems, and that's not right. It's not just government. It means we as citizens have to participate in reaching these sustainable development goals. Citizen groups, citizen organizations that can jump in. And the wonderful thing is these technologies can help them organize really fast. They can pull them together. They can leverage AI like ChatGPT. There's all these tools they can use. There's analytics tools. You can use them as a nonprofit group from a hyper local level of just your own small community and what you can do to make irrigation work or whatever it is in your area to the national and international scale. I have far more hope of where we're going than not. Just because we may not reach the SDG goals doesn't mean we shouldn't strive for them. It doesn't mean that we should just give up and walk away. We've got to have that goals. Maybe we'll move them a little bit. We might move them by 5 years or 3 years, but they're still absolutely critical. It gives us something to aim for, and we do better when we have that. And if we can tell stories better, and people can tell stories, and we can spend more time critical thinking and less time thinking in problems and thinking in systems as well. That would be kind of my takeaway.
Who do you think from the people you know that actually is doing relevant work in terms of achieving the SDGs? Who would you like to see in this podcast, for example, like that could give really interesting insights, or people that you admire because of the work they're doing?
Yeah, certainly, Greta Thunberg. Hey, it'd be great if you get her on. She's doing some wonderful work. I'd like to see people that are doing really cool, innovative things from different parts of like Africa. There were these young women from Kenya or Nigeria. I think they developed some really cool filtration technologies for water. Like some of those people, the younger generation, they're really doing some cool stuff, and if you can get people that are coming in from Africa, from different countries in Africa, parts of Latin America, I can't think of anybody really off the top of my head, but searching for those small groups and getting those people on and sharing their ideas, because they're the ones that are coming up with the really cool innovations. They're not coming out of big institutions, but they can come up with the ideas, and then the institutions can adopt them and get them out at scale.
Perfect. What do you think, to wrap up, we didn't talk about this new model of business called B Corp. Can you explain the concept for people that don't know what the B Corp is, and what do you think the impact might be in these terms of capitalism 2.0, pretty much?
Yeah, so B Corps it's sort of like the three main elements are people, planet, and profit, and you work towards helping people first, and that's paying a fair wage, that's bringing people up, upskilling them, then the planet and looking after the planet, and ESGs like environmental sustainability goals, taking those into account, and then and how your production and the way that you deliver your product and services is eco-friendly, and your impact on the planet and your footprint, and then profit comes last. But you'll still get a profit. It means you can still be a profitable business. We think profit is a dirty word, and it shouldn't be. It's just the question is how much profit and at whose cost? The cost of the planet, society, the rest of it. There are benefit models too. There's a benefit business model. There's some interesting new ones that are coming up. One of the oldest is co-ops. They tend to not work very well because they suffer for politics versus actually being very productive. But some co-ops do work very well, but they tend to work more locally versus on a national scale or an international scale. So we're trying out, we're experimenting with all kinds of models. That's why cryptocurrency is coming out. There's blockchain, and there's all these new models. There's a lot of experimentation going on. For them in the short term, the mega corporations are there. They're dropping their ESG goals. They're not talking about them anymore. We've got woke versus the far right and all these issues happening, and they're impacting companies and organizations. So businesses are trying to navigate, but the pressures from society are going to force business models to change over the next 20, 30 years.
Fantastic. Okay, Giles, thank you very, very much for this fascinating conversation.
Thank
I
you.
want to, I hope people will enjoy it once it's out there in our website. And I want also to tell our audiences that we, besides this podcast, we will have next week in another different podcast that is concentrating specifically in AI, called the alignment problem. We will have an engineer of OpenAI to understand how this is being built, and he will talk about DALI 3 and how his work as an engineer in there. And hope that you subscribe or like or whatever. I'm not into all these things. I just want to bring what I consider very important topics that are not probably too mainstream, but are existential for our future. I think we lost Giles. Yeah. So, okay. So, well, we'll see if he can come back and wait them. This is live streaming. So, of course, there are moments like this. And we'll see if he comes, maybe not. Well, I would like to remind you that you can follow us on Instagram, on Asimov Media, where we have another format called Questions for the Future, where you can participate by commenting, sharing it, or liking it. In Questions for the Future, we talk about, we just point out very relevant questions for the future of our society. And you can find the short stories on TikTok and Instagram. I think Giles cannot come back. Probably, maybe it's a connection problem. Well, I hope to. I will say goodbye to him privately, and to all of you. See you on the next episode. Thank you very much, and have a nice day.